Greetings, you're listening to Guiding Stars, Evolutionary Astrology Radio. I'm here today with Simon Vorster from Sweden. We're discussing Saturn in Sagittarius, or the ninth house. If you've been following along in this series, we've made it all the way through the zodiac, from Aries to Sagittarius today. If you know you have Saturn in Aries or Saturn in Cancer, Saturn in the third house, and we've already done that show, these webinars are available through EA Zoom on YouTube. And just enter it in the search engine there, and you should be able to find where your Saturn position is. But today, yes, Saturn in Sagittarius, or the ninth house, and we're just moving right along. I'd like to welcome Simon back to Guiding Stars. Welcome back, Simon.
Thanks very much, Kristin. As always, I love it when we get to chat about EA and this wonderful series that is Saturn.
Yeah, we are living Saturn, all of us. Saturn is in the sign of Capricorn, the sign that it naturally rules. Pluto, the planet of the soul, the planet of empowerment. It is the energy that we speak to in the world of evolutionary astrology. It is our frontline focus. Pluto is also in Capricorn, which reflects this just the world of patriarchal insurgents, I think, on our planet right now. And when we think about Saturn in Capricorn, we think about the energy of either one of those, Saturn or the sign of Capricorn. It connects to the fact that everything has a limit. And I think we are really experiencing that now, of course, in our environment, concerned about our environment. This planet is going through quite a bit. I think about the fires in Brazil and how they're affecting, how the trees are so important to deal with the carbon dioxide and to allow us to have a safer planet, to be in a safer planet to inhabit. There's the ice melting, and that is going to be affecting the temperature on our planet. And so we're living during a time there's Capricorn for you again, where things are reaching a limit politically, environmentally. And today is Saturn in Sagittarius, which has to do with nature, natural law, and how do we deal with things from a natural perspective. And so I just wanted to share that, speaking to some of these transits that are so prevalent right now. And but before we dive in, Simon, is there anything you wanted to share? I'm sorry I got derailed there with thoughts about the transits currently, but anything that you'd like to let the listeners know before we dive into Saturn and Sag, or the ninth house?
Yeah, no problem with getting caught up with the Saturn stuff. I completely understand. Just for anybody that wants to know where our online presence is, I have a website called www.raising, and then there's a hyphen, and then vibrations.com. And that's where I'm online, and you can go ahead and look at all of the stuff that I do over there. We write articles, we have an online school, we've got sort of webinar teachings, we've got loads of other articles on astrology, we do readings and stuff. So go check out our website if you're interested in understanding more about the work that I do. And yeah, that's about it.
All right, awesome. It's so interesting. I was just talking to a client earlier about Greta Thunberg. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, who I'm just fascinated by. She's from Sweden there, Simon. You're probably hearing a lot about her. But it was so cool because, this big march about the environment occurred on 9/19/2019. My daughter turned 19 on that day, special day. And I'm just blown away by her. She is a Capricorn. She was born January 3rd, 2003. Of course, and she's got a moon in Capricorn too, Mercury in Capricorn. Think about this. Here's this little girl. She's 13 years old. She's got 3 planets in Capricorn. There's an unknown birth time, but somebody rectified her chart and put her Pluto in the ninth, which I could totally see that being the case. She has Mars and Venus in Scorpio, and she's not afraid of anything, is she? They're also in a new phase. So anyway, her Saturn is retrograde in Gemini, so she clearly has a message to send. And I mean, how incredible that she could take that little Mercury in Capricorn too and get into politics and go toe to toe with men in suits. I love it. Anyway,
Nice.
she has come here to recover her voice for sure, and I definitely think she was sent by the mother Gaia, Mother Earth, to try and help establish more balance here, at least get a message out that we've got to start doing something to protect this place and protect it for our children to come.
Yeah.
So anyway, I was thinking about you when I saw her, was thinking about this chart, and anyway, interesting that there's all that Capricorn energy. So when we think about Capricorn, we think about Saturn. It can connect to just, in her case, she sort of came in as an adult, I would say,
Yeah.
really matured very quickly and knew full well what her purpose and her path was in this lifetime. And so Capricorn has to do with how we mature, has to do with our conditioning, the culture we were born into, and the time that we were born. What was going on in the planet at that time. All of this is a Saturnian phenomena, and it reflects the nature of the culture that you lived and you entered when you were born. Essentially, the natal placement of Saturn by house and sign and aspects will speak to that experience for you personally. And so let's talk a little bit about, to remind people what Saturn means in the birth chart before we get specific again with Sagittarius of the 9th house. And we've done that with other shows. And just to kind of lay down the foundation, if you would, Simon, to share a few thoughts on that.
Sure. I like how you enter you sort of like lead the conversation to laying the foundation, because that's really a Saturn theme. And it is really that. I mean, if you actually look at the picture that's on the screen at the moment, for anybody, of course, that's watching this, you'll see that this planet itself, the Saturn planet, has a ring around it. And it's symbolic to the archetype of Saturn in our charts and in reality. And we're bound to the physical form, and that physical form has a conditioning field, and it has confinement, and there are limitations. And so Saturn speaks to the part of us that can, it shows us where our psychological limitations are and where our conditioning field is. And it speaks to the structure, the overall structure and the foundation for how you actually orientate yourself in life. I just recently did a Saturn Direct video, and the imagery that I used was of a lighthouse. And I love the lighthouse as the imagery for Capricorn or Saturn, because it's the point that guides people, or in this case, the ships, as it were. It guides the captains of the ship to dock. And it's what it's referring to in the symbolism and also the archetype of Saturn is that it's a solid structure that helps us when we're meandering and wandering the seas of our own existence. And it's solid and it stays in the same place. And so because of that, Saturn is the part of us that grounds us to anchor ourselves into a place where we can feel centered. So wherever you've got Saturn in our chart and the 9th house, sorry, not the 9th house, where you got Capricorn and whatever sign's ruling your 10th house, you will see that that's the part of your chart where the soul really came to anchor itself in, to help you mature into more groundedness within yourself, more stillness. And it's the part of the chart that also promises where you can grow into authority. If you are disciplined enough to work with your Saturn in your chart, the rewards are maturity, and maturity translates to a sense of wisdom, like an ability to have how to help people understand the boundaries of things, and it's knowledge in that way. That's why you always see, ironically, in this situation, considering we're talking about a 13, 14-year-old girl. I'm not sure how old she is.
Yeah, I think she's 13.
Yeah. That generally in this case, Saturn archetypes will reflect the council, and the council the group of people that are the council to the community, or to, in this case, the governments, as it were, would be a Saturn dynamic in their distorted sense. It's counseling, or the council reflects where maturation and age has been traded for wisdom. So we are, in a sense, with our Saturn placement, aspiring to become wise in that area, and that becomes the authority in that sense. So yeah.
Right. And so Saturn, as a result, also connects to respect. She's earned the respect of people 4 times her age.
Sure.
Right? At least. And the energy about taking something seriously.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. The idea of taking something seriously is definitely a theme that I sense within her story. And it's also interesting as well, considering that this is a kind of Sagittarius archetype, that one of the things that's also clear about what you said earlier, that this is kind of a limit. I think that's what really the message is being sort of pushed through here when you talked about people being born during a time. So Saturn will reflect the kind of time that you were born into. And she's really born into a time where Saturn was in Sagittarius. Pluto was in Sagittarius. So the emerging sort of theme of nature itself is deeply embedded within the storyline of the Pluto and Sagittarius. And so she is definitely bringing to the people a message of that we need to outgrow the old archaic beliefs that once served us, but don't anymore, around fossil fuels, as an example. And I think that that's really what's important about, to me at least, with her message, is because there's a tremendous amount of things surrounding her sort of travels around the States at the moment. And I think it can be very easy to get lost in all of the media and how people are spinning different situations, that her message really is that we need to kind of change the way that we've been living right now. And it's a Pluto and Capricorn theme right now, but it's a Pluto and Sagittarius theme that they're bringing alongside it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she also has a South node in Sag, by the way. And so Pluto's conjunct that.
Sure.
And, it kind of reminds me of back in the days of the EA school and Jeffrey asking the question, let me see a show of hands of those of you who would be willing to die for what you believe in. And everybody, of course, raised their hand because you want to believe that you would.
Sure.
But when push comes to shove, how many people would really do that?
Yeah.
And I feel like she's putting herself out there. I'm not, she's challenging, all these corporate people that are just swimming in self-interest, and all they care about is the dollar. And this is something she's laying down her life for sure. I mean, it's something that means everything to her. Pluto and the South Node are trining her natal Jupiter. That's also retrograde in Leo, which has this very far-reaching impact. There's this international reach that her soul has. You can see that within these symbols. And I mean, she's got Jupiter's retrograde, Mercury's retrograde, and Saturn is retrograde. This is really a revolution. She's wanting to revolutionize the mind,
Sure.
the culture, the way of thinking, the way of the corporate world. And so anyway, a strong understanding of natural laws, and also a deep soul memory of nature and the way that it was before it was destroyed.
Sure.
And desperately trying to put a stopgap on this. So with her message, and to get other people on board. Now, one other thing I wanted to add is transiting Pluto is also forming a sextile to her Mars and her Venus. Hasn't been here in 248 years, so she does have a lot of support astrologically.
And it's a very interesting theme considering what we're talking about, because Sagittarius as an archetype also has to do with convince and convert.
No, right.
And also about the nature of one's own faith or truth.
Right.
And you can see those themes very clearly there, not only in her story and what's occurring right now, but also what would naturally be part of somebody with Saturn in Sagittarius. Now, I'm not saying that convince and convert is a dynamic that this is kind of an aspect of it, because it's the nature of the sign itself, but it's a very interesting thing to see in the world at the moment, where there is a need to convince some people that whatever it is that their vision is about, that Pluto and Sagittarius is, that it's convert them. It's like it's our nature to not let go of things that are comfortable to us. It's a very confronting thing. And I think that's also something that's very much a part of Saturn in Sagittarius as an archetype, is that, we are the root of our security. Because even though Cancer as an archetype is security in and of itself, Saturn, through the boundaries that hold us in a state of security through our boundaries, like to put a wall around something, to feel solid in it, if that's shaken, then we can feel insecure there. So Saturn in Sagittarius, as an example, can be influenced by, or can have their sense of security threatened through their truth being not what they thought it was. And I'm sure it's something similar to the Sagittarius generation at the moment. And I've done a lot of investigation. I'm super fascinated by this generation and their relationship to the Pluto and Virgos. And one of the things that stood out for me very clearly was when Pluto was in Sag, what was predominantly the kind of things that were taking place. Like when you look at the impact of the themes. So this was 1995 until 2008, right? And a lot of the 2000s, we, especially the States, and I say we, but really America, you guys had George Bush sort of at the helm of your presidency, and he, if I understand it correctly, is very much into religion, and he definitely tried to convince most of America that the world, that there were sort of weapons of mass destruction. And a lot of that period of time during the 2000s was about needing to believe in something. Even the World Twin Towers as an example, and that coming down, it was a huge effort to convince the American nation, and it was something that worked, obviously, that there was a need to go to war, because of course your whole entire security was threatened. So what's interesting to me is that this generation, we're coming onto the planet with this imprinting, and I want to see how this plays out as we move further along and they become more prominent on the planet, of what information, especially in the technological age that we live in today, can be trusted and what is not, and what agenda is being used for purposes that are honest and authentic and have integrity, and that don't. And this is a kind of Sagittarius theme, and Saturn in Sagittarius has a lot to do with that as well. I've got a chart up today as well of somebody that has Saturn in the 9th house, and very clear that those themes are going to be something that they're going to need to work with in this lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's important to remember that Sagittarius and the 9th house, as it relates to beliefs, can also be consensus beliefs, religious beliefs.
Exactly.
That Jeffrey used to refer to this as the Billy Graham archetype, convincing and converting people to the religion he was promoting, peddling. And so I grew up with a lot of that kind of vibe. So, I'm speaking from some proximity to that kind of approach to things. So anyway, so it's not, doesn't necessarily mean that it's evolved. We talk about ninth house, we talk about ninth house, we talk about natural laws
Yes.
as it relates to Sagittarius, but just because someone's got Saturn in Sag or Saturn in the ninth doesn't mean they're coming from that place.
Yeah.
It could be a very conservative experience of that, or in my case, it was a religious experience of that, where it was us versus them mentality. If you don't believe this, then that will happen. And so it would instill the fear of God. You think about Saturn being an archetype of fear, it could instill the fear of God. And Jupiter, which rules Sag, is the old ruler for Pisces before Neptune became its ruler. And so you can see how that plays out there, even in its connection to the square to a fellow mutable archetype of Pisces and Neptune. So it's important to know that just because someone's got Saturn in Sag or Saturn in the ninth house, it doesn't mean that they're, really embodying.
Well, that's the thing that you're talking about here, is that, we talk about maturation as a Saturn pathway, and, Saturn in Sagittarius or Saturn in ninth house soul, they clearly are born into a dynamic in which those themes are there. And you had mentioned about religion being the time. So your parents, when you were born, that was the kind of dynamic of religion was very strong at that time. And so it was definitely imprinted onto you. And part of your storyline was to make sense of what that meant for you. I think definitely that would be how I at least intuitively understand the process. What is the role that plays in your life? And maybe that's kind of that Saturn ninth house question. And because you can take consensus religion, and it's deeply affected by the way that the psyche operates, which is split into two through polarity, right? And so we got heaven and hell as an example, and these two polarities are very prominent in our perception of reality. So religion at a consensus level can be deeply influenced by this light and dark, the us and them. But when you look at Jeffrey Wolf Green's work, who also has Saturn in the ninth house, he had, just like with yourself, he's got the symbol of the cross with him, and he's close to Jesus in that way, or Christ in that sense. But his orientation, I think, or sense, is not of a religious dynamic, and it has a deeper meaning to it. And I suspect that you've got the same. And that's another way to actually see that Sag as an archetype is, pushing us to, as it evolves out of, Scorpio is the sign that precedes it, right? So as Jeffrey used to talk about, with everything was deep and intense and scorpionic and right down to the surface, and then we would come out in the Sagittarius lens and it would be like lighter, Anybody that's had a progressed moon move through the eighth house and then it hits your ninth, you feel that. You're like, oh, thank God.
God, what a relief, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So there is a kind of, and it's a fire sign, and so it's mutable in that sense. So the energy is a lot more optimistic and lighter. So it's really saying to us that, oh, okay, well, there's actually a lot more depth to life, eighth house, and so let's go and explore that, Sag, right? So that this is an exploration, Sagittarius, the exploration of higher consciousness or higher awareness in that way, or at least a broader sense of perspective. And you can see that evident within your own life and within Jeff's life, who both have Saturn in the ninth house. That maturation process with Saturn and Sag is to strengthen your relationship to your own faith, and then what that means. And in that sense, not needing to necessarily have to play out more of the shadowy aspects of the Saturn or the Sagittarius archetype, which is, well, your faith needs to be the same as mine, ultimately.
Right, exactly. He told a funny story in the school about at a different state when he was discussing about the different stages of evolution, and he was talking about being this really charismatic kind of rebellious type soul who would be by horseback running through a town and and shouting out all these things that people needed to know or believe in, that kind of rebellious, it kind of feels sort of like a second stage spiritual kind of story. And I don't know, probably got killed for it. But you know what I mean? Like just making a ruckus and about it. And it made me laugh, that kind of story, because it really was a convincing and confronting. Come on, wake up, people. Yes. This is the truth, And the Saturn in the ninth house is really about, in his case, being rooted in natural teachings and natural laws and following natural teachers. Like Jesus actually was a natural teacher until men got a hold of the message and turned it and spinned it and everything else. But, Jesus taught people how to access the Godhead within. That when thine eye becomes single, the body becomes full of light, is a scripture in the Bible, which essentially means when you tune into the third eye, you can experience the God within. You can become full of light. And so his Saturn in the ninth, and as well as mine, comes from this place of caring, or I would say having an experience of natural teachers in the past. In his case, he is a natural teacher of truth, and this work also is obviously allows us to be able to access the truth for ourselves and to experience it that way. And so, yeah, he is a ninth house Sagittarius teacher himself, but also followed natural teachers rooted in the truth. Bottom line, and the body knows the truth when it experiences it. We all know that. You don't have to have Saturn in the ninth to know the truth. When you feel it, when you experience it, it's just a feeling that you have. The truth does speak for itself, and the body doesn't lie. And so, maybe you have planets. Somebody has planets in Sagittarius, planets in the ninth house. You know what I'm talking about. Maybe Jupiter's conjunct your moon. It doesn't matter what sign it's in. You're going to know the truth. You're going to feel it in your belly. You're going to know it when you hear it. So that's a Sagittarius phenomenon. But anybody with Saturn in the ninth or in Sagittarius, remember the Saturn component in a chart conditions every other planet. So if you have Saturn in Saturn in Sagittarius and it's not in the ninth house, it doesn't matter here because it's in Sag, it will be like the wrapping that exists around every other planet that you have. And it's just wrapped with Sagittarian energy. Saturn in the ninth in another sign will carry the energy of that other sign as well. So it's important to understand how this Saturn archetype, that this planet influences all of every other planet in your chart, but also how it influences how you experience life in the body. Saturn is the body. It is the bones, the skin that keeps the soul intact. And so it's energizing a certain kind of archetype, and that will influence how you experience being in the body as a soul having a human experience.
Yep.
So obviously with Saturn in the ninth or Saturn in Sag, it's such an expansive energy. There's a high degree of a desire for adventure, to grow, to always be growing. It's like there's nothing better for that Sagittarian soul than to, get in a car or on a plane or on a bike and just go. It's that feeling of expansion, of following the horizon, going after something, experiencing that kind of freedom, taking the world in around you, taking in the natural experiences that you have when you're in motion. And that's part of the Sagittarian experience, especially being that it's a international energy, right? Multicultural, Sagittarian, this gypsy, nomadic kind of vibe that you carry within you, that it's just part of who you are, this need to roam.
Yeah. And I actually got these two sort of imagery, or the imagery with writing on over here, and as you were talking about cool. The Saturn in Sagittarius thing, I was like, yep, that's exactly it, right? I like these.
I love these. These are wonderful. Home is in nature, and even though we're discussing Saturn and Sag, or Saturn in the ninth, typically, and again, this is going to influence the moon and everything else. Typically, people don't feel at home really anywhere, right?
Right.
So
Exactly.
because, and then at the same time as home is wherever you are at the same time, it's not one permanent place. I don't feel at home anywhere, always searching, or always roaming, always reaching. And yet there is this ability to pitch a tent, and make that your home for the night. That's what the Saturn and Sag, Saturn in the ninth soul can do.
Yeah, that's right. And what you reminded me of there with in terms of the restlessness and stuff is that it's actually an essential part of the purpose of the soul. To go a little bit deeper into more deep psychological work. If you've got Saturn in the ninth house or in Sag, a huge part of your story is about connecting to nature and what's natural law. And what I mean by that is that what things are natural. So my daughter, she has Saturn in Sagittarius, right? She was born 2015, and she's the one in the home that's she refuses to wear clothes. She's only 4, so she's like, nope, don't want to do this thing. And just the nature of her being, she doesn't eat meat. She was allergic to milk, and it's just her nature. It's not something that we kind of said, oh, you have to do this, you have to do that. And it's just her nature. And it's really fascinating to watch her interact, because she really is kind of Sag rising as well. So she's definitely in that kind of exploration dynamic with her Saturn and Sag. You can see it there. But what's also fascinating as well is that Saturn in the ninth house of Sagittarius souls can also have karmic dynamics where one or both parents, if they're not religious on some level, can have an orientation to some form of truth. Like both parents could be teachers, or one parent's a teacher or a philosopher, like a lecturer at a university. There's always a kind of higher education type of theme. And it's also that the parents or the family dynamics can have a lot of international influence, and what that really reflects on some level is kind of the soul's journey, where their lives have been with other cultures, and those type of cultures can lead through in terms of the mother being sort of immigrated from one country and now they live in another country. And it's a really interesting thing to observe. So I know that many people have got that type of dynamic in themselves, and it kind of opens up to explore the world. That's the key. It's like the exploration of knowing that the world is not just this limited place in terms of your little county or your little state, but it goes beyond that, and it's kind of like wanting to push the boundaries and the borders, opening up to what's really there.
Well, look at how literal it is, because Saturn is the archetype of the father, right?
Right.
And you are her father.
Yeah.
In Sagittarius, you're a teacher of EA, but you're also not born in Sweden. You're born
Correct.
in South Africa. So it's so literal. It can be so literal. I love how it works that way.
Yeah, completely. Absolutely. So let's have a look at a chart.
Okay.
This is yours, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Oh yeah, this is. So I feel like what's really important to remember here is even though it's in the ninth house, it's in another sign. It's in Pisces, and the most direct way to understand this is, obviously, as I shared, I grew up with a lot of religion, and Saturn and Pisces and the ninth is a perfect combination there.
Yeah.
But it was my soul's way of hiding behind, and I was in mainstream kind of consensus family, hiding behind my nature, hiding as Pisces. It's a skip step. You can see the square to the nodes, because whenever I was actualizing my nature in the world, there were consequences for that. And there's an incredible amount of judgment, persecution with the Pluto-Uranus opposition Chiron and that Saturn. And so my soul has been working its way back, so to speak. And I even have some recent past life memories, my most 2 recent past lives that occurred to me through dream, which is Pisces, right?
Sure.
Also, the ruler of my South Node, Mercury and Sun, is Jupiter in the 12th house in Gemini retrograde. So it's recovering the past through these dreams. And I have memories of my life in the 1800s, a life during the why am I blanking on the name of the time then? Roaring 20s. What do you call it? No, it wasn't the Roaring 20s. That's this 1900s.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh my gosh, it wasn't in England anyway in the 1800s. Everything
the
was
Victorian era.
Victorian, thank you. Gosh, I couldn't think of the word. I'm sure I've tried to forget it. But women are wearing these corsets or bustiers or corsets, whatever. Everything is just strapped in, these dresses. I mean, I could no further imagine being in a dress like that than flying to the moon. Like, there's just no way it would happen. Yeah. And no sooner, I should say, imagine myself in a culture like that. In fact, anytime I used to drive by a house in any neighborhood like that, I had an incredible amount of anxiety. Anyway, what happened in that life, this very repressed Victorian time, is I was married to somebody very wealthy. It was arranged marriage. You can see arranged marriage signatures in here, even with the Capricorn, Mars and Venus in the 7th. Yeah. In a very Capricorn culture. It was in England. And but we were wealthy enough to have horses. So there were stables and horses, and I connected with the woman who took care of the horses. And anyway, long story short, in that life, I ran away from that reality, but I went from literally having all the resources I need to barely enough to survive. And so there's this example of how the soul would come into this, hiding once again in this culture and just being so beyond disenchanted, just absolutely abhorred the whole reality, to the point of rebelling from it, and then it would just swing to these extremes, so having everything to having nothing. And then the life that followed was I was born into missionary parents, which is very similar to the same parents as this life. And we were going across the country by covered wagon. My brother in that life was one of my brothers in this life, and it was abducted by Indians. The parents were killed. We were raised by the Indians as white children. And so you see how it was the opposite. By having this life where I rebelled against that Victorian reality and was just wild, leaving that reality literally on horseback with only the clothes on my body, and then being born back into a life, but very early on in that life as a child being then raised by the Indians. And then the white man coming back in and taking me out of that reality again. So you can see how in these two recent lives, my soul had been going back and forth between a natural culture and a repressed conservative, reality, consensus reality. It's swinging back and forth through that Saturn in the 9th house, trying to get my soul back out of hiding and into the nature that would support my reality. And so this is an example. When you see Saturn in the 9th, it doesn't mean that soul is living a natural reality, but that the soul is in search for the truth again and working their way back, and perhaps coming through a family of origin where there is a more repressed or conservative reality, a dogmatic reality, and us versus them. For example, in a recent webinar I did, I had friends, or my first boyfriend was Jewish, and I was only in 6th grade. It's like spin the bottle, or hold hands on the playground, whatever it might have been. And I told my mom I wanted to marry him. Of course I wasn't going to marry him. I was 12. But he said, well, you can't marry him. He's Jewish. I said, what? So as a 12-year-old, I'm thinking, well, that's crazy. Does that mean all these people that don't believe what we believe are going to hell or something? You talk about heaven and hell with this archetype. And I was horrified. I'm like, that can't be true. No loving God would separate people like that. And so that's where it started, right there, approaching. Actually, it really got intense around my Saturn opposition, which is around 13, 14 years old. So a reflection of, being totally disillusioned by the parents who are telling you that your way, your belief, your faith was the only way. It was like, bah humbug, there's no way I'm going to believe that. So, the truth, when we hear something that doesn't feel true, of course we're going to have a reaction to it. And it is these things that we experience in the body that lead us back to the truth of, our truth, what we feel to be true, or what we know to be true, I should say.
That's right. Yeah. And what an interesting and really fascinating story, to be honest, in terms of looking at your chart and seeing those themes play out very clearly, especially with that conjunct Chiron.
My ultimate goal as a soul in this lifetime is to recover that skip step. I don't want, and since obviously I got into this work, it has been hardcore, full steam ahead, get into the center of it, no matter how much it hurts. Just living in the reality, Saturn, of the truth of something, no matter how much it hurts, and even no matter how much it might hurt somebody else, knowing because the truth always creates the right reality. Your honesty is always best, no matter how much it hurts, because it will always create the right reality, no matter what. And so many of us we will deviate from that thumbprint, right? We will deviate from the way that our soul has been designed in order to feel secure or safe or to protect ourselves, because for fear of judgment, or for what will people say about me, and what will they do with that. And it's very common for people to deviate from our natural design because of those reasons. Very few souls have ever not done that. Jeff Green is probably one of them. I'm sure he never deviated from that thumbprint. He never conformed. That is one thing that, I heard him say many times. And it can make for a very intense series of lives. And that's what they've been for him. So anyway, we do what we need to do in order to feel secure, but in the long run, it can delay our evolution. And, I know that firsthand. I'm seeing little movies of that, in my dreamscapes. And so anyway, that is how you can understand the Saturn and Pisces within the 9th house.
Yeah, very fascinating. And it's interesting that Neptune's transiting your Chiron at the moment, and you've had Neptune transit your Saturn the last 4 years. So you've really over the last 4 years come into kind of resolving that Saturn through Neptune in Pisces transit.
Yeah, it's been big, starting with Neptune coming over that Saturn for sure. And it's going to dissolve, right? The Neptune will dissolve all that all the resistance, the fear. It's going to dissolve the barriers, essentially. And, that can create a high degree of vulnerability. It's a little bit like learning how to swim and you're holding onto the side of the pool for dear life. I remember this too. And being young when I had swimming lessons, I was petrified to go out in the middle of that pool and have that swim teacher let go of me and, tell me to swim. But that's what the Neptune transit did over that Saturn. And, it really forced you into the center of the sea and said, okay, it's you and God now. It's you and your soul. You're swimming in all that you've created. We are all responsible for what we create. And now you got to figure out how to get back to shore, or, ride the tide, so to speak. And so, that's a big transit. Neptune will really over time reveal it all. Obviously, it's the archetype of illusion, but it can also symbolize healing, right? Rising above something. Yeah. Culminating, closure, resolving something.
That's true. Really cool. Really, I liked what you shared over there. Thanks very much. It was good. It was cool to hear that story out there. Very clear example of that Saturn in the 9th house. I've got one more chart over here that we can quickly look at before we end our conversation today. This is really interesting to me, because this type of soul, actually, with that Saturn conjunct that North Node in the 9th house, got Pluto in the 11th over there, and a lot of Pisces energy. they definitely come onto this planet, and with Saturn retrograde as well. There's and all of that Aries energy right at the bottom. This is somebody that very much seeking to, from at least from how I observe it or have had the conversations, is that they're definitely seeking to like reintegrate their truth into their own value system, and to actually pursue their sense of self. This is the Sun conjunct Uranus and Sun conjunct Mars and Venus here. That's actually in conjuncting that Saturn. Like you literally have here Uranus in conjunct Saturn in the 9th house, and coming in with that Pluto placement to, like I said, really speak their truth and live their truth, and actually discover their truth in a completely new way. I think with all of this Aries at the bottom here, that's influencing their South Node, which is in Taurus, and the second house, the same archetype, and the connection to the North Node being on top of Saturn. Very clear example that the soul also is highly confrontational. It's very, very confrontational, and yet at the same time extremely sensitive with all of that Neptune stuff. And it's an interesting thing here that they seemingly are wanting to come back to their natural way of being, what's natural for them. At least that's what I've observed, because this is a soul that was Pluto and Capricorn, so they're not really that old. Haven't even gone past their first Saturn square yet. But it's really interesting to observe this chart and how it manifests itself, and very evident and clear that this is like a commitment to their own personal truth and not sacrificing it at any cost whatsoever. There's a lot of information and situations around it that tries to convince the soul otherwise, and they're constantly having to kind of hold their personal truth for themselves, even if it goes against the environment around them.
Great. Well, I was just noticing some very big transits too going on. You've got the Pluto is squaring the Aries line up there.
Yep.
Squaring the Mars and the Venus, and then sextiling the Moon and the Mercury. And so, Pluto rules that Saturn in the 9th house, right? In Scorpio, it's retrograde, of course. This is a chart for very independent, rebellious,
Yes.
I will not conform for my life. No way, Jose.
I have to follow my own truth, yeah.
And so this is a big little evolutionary shoot for this soul. And what I love about astrology, but of course evolutionary astrology in particular, and the way we look at transits in terms of honoring certain symbols in our chart, is that everything's really seen in terms of checks and balances. I mean, you can see that hard square, that Pluto square to the Mars Venus, and then the same amount of favorable energy with the sextile to the Moon and to Mercury, remembering that Pluto rules that Saturn in Scorpio and the North Node there.
Yeah.
So when we have equal amounts of stress and support, that is the absolute ideal energy for evolving.
Yeah.
Because the stressful transits are not going to let you lay low, and the supportive transits are going to give you what you need to make it happen. And so we can't just all of one and all of another. Either it's just so painful, or it's so easy to be lazy that not a lot happens typically. And the stressful, you feel you can be so traumatized by something that sometimes you don't experience the benefits of it, with everything just blows up in your face. But to have 2 and 2 in this way is just optimal.
Yeah.
So what a time for this soul to be alive. And there's different times, Saturn, in our life. When we look at time, we look at transits, there are different periods in our life when we're calling in transits that are intended for us to evolve, and our soul knows it. It can happen when you're 7. It can happen when you're 25 or 54. And it's all timed for a reason. There
Sure.
are reasons it takes a certain amount of time, or there's a reason someone has to go through something when they're younger. I mean, in my example, I was reflecting about Pluto through my fourth house when I was in middle school. It was
Mm.
one of the hardest. Middle school is a hard time for anybody, because you're just all the hormones, everything, that teenage rebellion's kicking in. But I went to 4 funerals when I was in middle school,
Oh my gosh.
and of kids my age. 4 live caskets when I was in 7th and 8th grade. And
Yeah,
I'm like, oh my gosh. And I wasn't the only one, right? The entire, all of my friends attended these same funerals. So, what was it that I called in at that time, at that age, that, I needed to? What was I needing to experience or learn at that time? And that's a different conversation. But so
Yeah.
because Pluto takes 80 years to go all the way around the zodiac, some people, may never have it in their 4th house in a lifetime through
No.
transit, but they'll have it somewhere else. And so, everything is meant to happen at the time it is happening. And I think that is, really important lesson as we think about Saturn, and in terms of time and timing. Developmental timing is a Saturnian expression.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
That's true.
all right, that was an awesome show. I loved it. Of course, anytime we can talk about Sag, I love it. Anytime we can talk about Saturn, actually, I'm beginning to love. No. I
Right.
love
12 opportunities.
I've loved this journey with you, Simon. It's been wonderful. And we will be back next month as we take a look at Saturn in Capricorn, or the 10th house, which we are all feeling in full and in spades at the moment through this transit. So that'll be really timely as well. And I'll look forward to journeying with you then, Simon, and the rest of you. Until next time, namaste.